In a so-called free state, officials and stakeholders concoct solutions to problems often created by other bureaucrats and with little regard for infringements on the people. These stories are born at the apex of freedom and entrepreneurship. We foolishly advocate for the taxpayer. Brian's Beat presents Freedom Fools.
It's a Saturday afternoon, and hey, where's the rain? Not that I want it, but where's the rain? My son's fiance is supposed to be having one of those bridal showers, and it was supposed to rain, so they changed the venue. Welcome to Freedom Fools on WBSM. Brian, glad to be with you. This is not an evening show anymore. It is a Saturday afternoon program, and we've got 3 hours ready for you. If you'd like to join in on the program today, you're more than welcome to do so at 508-996-0500. We have a guest coming up, and then a couple of topics that I'd like to get into later on, hours 2 and hour 3. One dealing with the Real ID. Real ID. Have you gotten it already? Are you using it? And no, I don't have one. And another topic that I'll bring up during hour number 2 deals with Eversource and what they have planned for you and me and Eileen coming up in just a bit. But let's start off like we normally do. Today is Cultural Freedom Day. Cultural Freedom Day. I think there are lots of people that are staying indoors, not going to the grocery store, not going to school, not going to work because they think that their culture may be under attack. I don't know how many people are thinking it is Cultural Freedom Day, but it is, according to the makeshift calendar that I have. International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. Can almost mix that in with Cultural Freedom Day. Learn to Swim Day. Now, this happens every year about this time, right before we go into the Memorial Day weekend, which is next weekend. Because lots of kids go into the water and they realize after they get in, damn, I don't know how to swim. And then you know what happens. River Cleanup Day and World Hypertension Day. All of that happening on this very day, May 17, 2025. In 1775, during the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress, Continental Congress, they forbade, they said, no trading with Canada. You might be thinking, why? Well, Canada was linked to Great Britain. And who are we having that Revolutionary War against? Connect the dots. Very good. We said hello to the New York Stock Exchange on this date in 1792. And what a day in 1973. We first saw the televised hearings of Watergate within the halls of Congress on this date in 1973. That leads to the Brian's Beat quote of the day. Within our dreams and aspirations, we find opportunities. Within our dreams and aspirations, we find opportunities. That quote from Sugar Ray Leonard. Long time ago he said that. But speaking of looking for those opportunities within the dreams, within the aspirations, there have been a series of rallies throughout the South Coast, throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the nation. And We're going to find out exactly what's been going on with those rallies, why they're happening. Will they continue? Craig Swallow is with me, and I'm sorry, he gave me his title, but he's with the indivisible South Coast New England group, and I might have screwed up that name. That's why I'm trying to say it. I'll have it all for you. I promise. I'll have it all for you when we come back on Freedom Fools on WBSM. Welcome back to Freedom Fools. He's calling for freedom. There are a lot of people calling for freedom, and there are others that are just, they don't like what's going on at this particular time. I try to see both sides, but, I am who I am, and I'm a constitutional type person. That is not going to change. And in saying that, there have been several rallies, Fairhaven, Dartmouth, New Bedford, of course, up in Boston. And, I wanted to find out, are there going to be any more? Exactly why folks are out there rallying. Why are other folks driving by and saying they don't know exactly why they are rallying? And I said, well, the best way to find out is to ask. And so I searched out, one of my Facebook friends happened to know someone within the group Indivisible Southern New England, Indivisible South Coast. And Craig Swallow got back to me. And he is a member, an active member, a speaking member of the organization. And he is in studio with me today. Craig, good afternoon. Welcome to Freedom Fools.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
Great. You live...
I live in New Bedford, Mass.
So you're local?
Yes. Yep. Was born and raised here. Moved to Boston and New York City and Austin, Texas for a little bit, but have been back in the area for a year and a half.
So why don't we start with the group Indivisible? What is the exact title? Because I've been butchering it.
Yeah, no worries. I am just a local co-leader, I would say. We try to keep things very democratic and let everyone get involved if they have something they want to spearhead, like a rally or, a protest. So I'm on the leadership board of a couple groups. There's one based down in New Bedford called Southeast Mass. And then there's one sort of that is a coalition of Massachusetts District 9 and Rhode Island District 1 called South Coast New England.
Okay, so I get it now, interjecting the fact that South Coast isn't just in Massachusetts.
Yeah, we see that these two districts have a lot of similar issues, being coastal communities. So we see the value in working together.
So over the past 2 or 3 months, there have been quite a few protests. What are the commonalities if we bring Rhode Island into this, or just the Indivisible? What's going on?
I would say the mission of Indivisible, and I think this is why, it works between MA9 and RI1, and why you see this as a nationwide movement is just maintaining our rule of law, our democratic systems, and, as you said, the Constitution. We believe that no administration, regardless of party, should be able to roughshod over the Constitution. These are systems that have been in place for almost 3 centuries now for a reason. These are the distinguishers between us and, authoritarian states. And so we want to make sure that regardless of party, everyone is welcome to join Indivisible if these are the things that you believe in. If you believe in democracy, rule of law, checks and balances, there's a place for you in Indivisible.
So in saying what you just said, to the best of your knowledge now, you have Republican and Democrat and unenrolled and I guess
Libertarian.
Independent. And I didn't see any of my people.
But yeah, we really want to encourage anyone that, regardless of, political party, there's no questions of what your party is when you want to join Indivisible. If you're, upset about what is happening, violations of due process, things of that nature, again, there is a place for you in our group. We are.
So what exactly got you guys started when the Trump administration took over? Was there an incident that happened that said, we got to get together right now?
Well, I mean, there's a few things there. Indivisible is a nationwide group. It was founded by Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg. They are policymakers and activists in of themselves. And this Indivisible was formed back when the first Trump administration came into office. And so my experience has been recent, like you said, in the past few months is when I joined. So there is a national sort of hierarchy that we sort of, hear from Leah and Ezra once a week about what they're focusing on, what individual states should be focusing on, and this sort of will trickle down effect. We aren't by any means behest to what national says, but they're a good structure and a good way to help us be more impactful and reach more people and get people to join our movement. You
said that the organization pretty much started during Trump won.
Correct.
So what about that period when Biden was in office? Were there, obviously you weren't with them, but were there rallies during that administration? I guess that depends on sort of what your perspective is. I am sure there's always something to fight for, and regardless of who is the president, I think there's always a reason to hold elected officials accountable. I think regardless of Democrat or Republican, we've seen times where there's abuses of power. And I think our mission is to make sure that those abuses of powers aren't being. Good. All right. So can you give me your first abuse of power that you saw within the Trump administration that said, yeah, I'm getting involved right now?
Well, I always considered myself an informed voter. I would say after this last election, I took a break, checked out for a month. I think I needed to reset my mind, put myself in a different place. Your person
didn't win? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I will be honest, sure, I voted for Kamala Harris, and, I think I was nervous about the things that could possibly happen under a second Trump administration. And then we started to see, for me personally, some of these things. I think violations of due process, for me, are one of the biggest issues.
A lot of people have said that. But what I want you to do for me is, which was that first break of due process?
When I reached out to Indivisible?
People down to El Salvador. What was that ticking point that said, yeah, I knew I was right not to vote that way?
Yeah, I would say, I think, I was already involved with Indivisible, but I think when we saw an ICE agent here in our local community smash through a window without a warrant was the biggest violation. And when we all really knew that the things that he was saying, there's lots of people who are like, he doesn't mean what he says. If we're talking about the president and his administration. And we saw that happen. I think, again, regardless of who is the president, that is an extreme violation. I would encourage your viewers to think of themselves in that situation. And if an ICE agent showed up demanding that you open your car door and prove your citizenship, I don't drive around with my passport or my birth certificate or my social security card. So how do you prove?
You have your smart ID.
But how do you prove you are a citizen if you are not given due process?
I have tried to make that point several times, and it's like, that song that Judy Garland sang, Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Who doesn't know that song?
Yeah, well, that's the way it seems to be. But there are a lot of folks, to your point earlier, that would say, well, I would roll down the window and I'd give them whatever paperwork. Your thoughts to that?
I would say that is a violation of your rights.
But a lot of people don't want to believe that.
Unfortunately, I think, some people do have to experience some of these things to actually have that switch flipped, which for us, again, is, I think, a scary consideration because...
You ever have a police officer pull a gun on you?
Thankfully, no.
I wish I could say the same.
Unfortunately,
I have. And so I do know from which you are sympathetic to, but I can empathize with. And Most people, thankfully, have not had anything like that happen. I would also question when it comes to ICE, Homeland Security, they're not the local police or state police. When you get pulled over, usually for a driving infraction, there are a different set of rules for that compared to an immigration stop, especially when you're trying to tell folks you are a U.S. citizen or have a right to be here.
I also think it's really frightening to think about, like, to your point, when you're pulled over by a police officer or a state trooper, there is that identification, there's that vehicle, there's that knowledge as you're pulling over that you are being pulled over by a certain officer from whatever jurisdiction you're in. It is an entirely different thing, and I hope most viewers, or listeners, should I say, would consider if you are walking out of your house in the morning to go get your day started and unidentified masked people were to come up to you, what would your initial reaction be?
What do we say to our kids?
To defend yourself, to defend yourself, or not let unknown people.
But if you defend yourself, you are resisting.
And
there's another charge.
Yes, and again, when they're unidentified, how most people wouldn't let a stranger come up and grab them and say, "You're coming with me."
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. 508-996-0500 if you would like to join into the conversation. So, I recall 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, there was an indivisible rally at Fairhaven High School. I might be off on the exact Saturday.
Correct.
A couple of weeks before that, at the Dartmouth, outside the Dartmouth Mall, there have been indivisible rallies in New Bedford. How often are you guys? I mean, is it better to do a whole bunch? Is your point getting out there?
There's different tactics and approaches to that. There's the approach of having big showings. You want to have a big show out in Boston, like we saw on April 5th, I believe, the Hands Off rally, where there was close to 100,000 people in the Boston Common, and throughout the nation, I think we saw over 3 million people come out and demonstrate. So there's a lot of power in that sort of movement. There's also a lot of power in seeing local, smaller rallies and knowing that there are people like-minded to you that might look around and not know that there are other people who are like, this is not okay. This is a violation of my rights. And if that person's rights are being violated, how can I make sure that mine aren't going to be? So I think there's, different approaches. We encourage local indivisibles to form their own rallies on our days that we sort of advertise. Like our next one will be on June 14th. We're coinciding.
A long break
For
you guys, anyway.
There's other things that we as activists do, whether it be calling, our representatives to make sure that they're voting along the ways that we feel as voters that they should be as our elected officials. There are other things we do besides rallies. So there's always work to be done.
I'm glad you brought up the elected officials, and you did bring it up at the beginning. So we're talking about the Trump administration right now. What about some of the things that the Healy administration has done, or some of the things that our local officials are not doing? Do you guys rally because over the past year, the allowing immigrants to come into the Commonwealth has been a huge issue in housing them? Have you had rallies one way or the other in regards to that?
In terms of holding the Healy administration accountable as well?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there has been anything specific, not within our group, but I would say I know you are discussing Eversource coming up, and we would argue that, letting corporations like Eversource run monopolies, especially on our energy, is something that should absolutely be not allowed. And so whatever administration sort of plays part in that, I think there are lots of voters now who are aware of when elected officials are taking advantage of them, and elections have consequences. And so I would argue that they should fight for the voters' best interests if they want to continue to have their jobs.
Well, sadly, I find that the elected officials or those running for office are running on their own best interest. And how much money are you giving today?
Yeah, how much money? Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
How much money are you giving me today?
Yeah, well, I would agree, and I would encourage every listener here who has aspirations of running for office to. There are lots of groups who will help support. There's Run for Something who focuses on young young people running for office, people under 40. So there are ways out there that you can join the fight if you want to be in it. And so I would argue that we should see in 2026, locally and nationally, lots of working class people run for office. That I think the system
scared.
breaks.
I think that they're scared to do it. They're worried about their families. They're worried about themselves. And certainly with what's been I might have a different attitude, Craig. Craig Swallow is with us, by the way. I might have a different attitude if I didn't see U.S. citizens or people that are allowed to be here legally, people with work permits, also getting apprehended, getting detained, and hopefully not deported.
Yeah, that is something that we are not okay with as well. This is
But it's not okay enough.
No, which is why we are continuing to help spread this message and help people join our movement, because a big showing, if people continue to demonstrate and push back on these policies. And I would also argue that we are seeing these violations of rights, and they're egregious, and they really hold your attention, and it's hard to sort of look away. But I would encourage everyone to look away a little bit and see that they're losing these fights. These people are being released ultimately, those that have not been already shipped out of the country before they have the ability to have their due process. The ones that are having their due process are being released and able to stay in this country as they should. If you're going through the legal proceedings to become a citizen here, you should be able to do that. These people who are being apprehended contribute to our economy, contribute to our communities, contribute to our everyday life. And to ignore that will be a serious miscalculation on the part of the American people.
Let's break down what you just stated. And if you'd like to join in, the other day I was, I'm not sure if I saw this at New Bedford Light or the Standard Times, but there were 3 Guatemalans allegedly detained. All 3 work on the waterfront at the seafood packing places. And according to the author of the story, none of them had any records. And it made a point to show that this one person here had a work permit. Now, the way I'm looking at this right now, I have no idea what's going to happen to these 3 folks, but there are many people that will just say to you, get them out of here. Okay, you get those 3 out of here. Next thing you know, you're going to be going through all of those fish packing places, and a lot of people are going to end up leaving. What's going to happen to that fish packing plant? They're going to end up closing down. Then when you want to go buy your seafood on a Friday, what's going to happen? The price is either going to jack up through the roof or there's not going to be any roof.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not happening just locally either. This is happening nationally. I think even this past weekend, maybe the weekend before in Nashville, there was a sort of ice raid down Broadway where there are a ton of restaurants, and almost all of these restaurants, and mind you, some of these restaurants are owned by very vocal conservatives who would argue that all these people should be deported without any due process, had to shut down their kitchens at peak rush hour time for people going out to dinner because they were worried about their workers being apprehended by ICE.
And I would think some of the workers didn't go in because they didn't want to get apprehended.
Absolutely not. And and then that's the impact that you see there. And so what happens now is restaurants aren't able to serve food. Guests are upset. The staff now are dealing with guests who are upset, and they're having it's just a trickle down effect. And again, it goes back to the point of why are we not allowing these people due process?
Well, not allowing due process or processing them now that they're here. And I hear part of the argument, and I think it's more than valid. There are not enough immigration judges to handle this. But
that
to
is
me,
because
there's more than just that going on, because not that I'm saying yes to it. If you're dealing with criminal illegals, that's one thing. If you're dealing with illegals, that's another thing. But now this is crossing over to people that have a right to be here, people that are getting accosted, losing their visas because they were part of an op-ed piece.
Yeah, it is a fear and intimidation tactic. And to your point to the judges, their other tactic is to overwhelm the system. The system isn't designed to deal with this large influx, and they know that. And the point isn't that to be like, oh, well, our system is broken if it can't handle this influx. No, the system works. Let people have due process. It is when you try to, to your point, they're just trying to meet numbers, it seems, at this point and say, we told you that there are this many people. But what we're seeing, as you have pointed out, what they're doing is going after students with visas who disagree with them politically. You know, this sort of idea that agree or be sort of put down is just, again, completely un-American. Some of these things that this administration is doing are reasons why we wrote the Declaration of Independence.
And also we had James Madison put together a Bill of Rights.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then we have our Constitution, you know. And so I would argue that those are the legal parameters of which you have to hold people accountable.
But people don't want to do that. I get bombarded with listeners who are telling me, well, people came across the border, they weren't following the laws then, so why should we follow the laws now? And I keep on coming back, two wrongs don't make a right. And at that particular time, you'd let your mother go? I hear all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate because, yes, this is what, as you point out, this is what distinguishes us from somewhere like Russia or North Korea or Iran. These,
don't forget China.
Or China, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we could go down a list of, plenty of, nation states that violate rights.
Even nations that we are fairly friendly with do not have a due process like we have. Most countries, you have to prove your innocence. Here, the authorities have to prove you're guilty.
Right. And so, again, it sounds like it in the conversation I'm having with people who might not agree with me politically, which I think I am, pretty, centrist, you could say, but I would argue that is all perspective. You know what I mean? There's our idea of centrist and, conservative here is wildly different than other nations. So, yeah.
Other nations? How about other people?
Yeah, for sure. But ultimately we do have the laws that we have in place. These are our laws. These are what distinguishes us. This is what makes us the greatest nation in the world.
Without a doubt, and I would agree wholeheartedly on that. And I would say, if you don't like the laws, work to get them changed. Look, we have a beautiful framework. We need to follow it. I understand some of the complaints about birthright citizenship, but the way that President Trump is going about it is not the way that the Constitution says you should do it. In this particular case, you would need to amend, I should say, the 14th Amendment. It's not the easiest thing to do, but if you want to make that change, better start on it right now.
I mean, the only time we've had an amendment to get rid of another amendment is for prohibition. So,
no. We used to appoint senators, and now we elect U.S. senators.
Touche. I will agree with you there. That is correct. Yes. There are few amendments that are designed to repeal another amendment, I would say.
And we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment because slavery used to be on the books, although I don't recall slavery actually being in the Constitution in and of itself. You did have folks that were only known as 3/5 of a citizen, and that included women.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So the changes can be made. It might be slow, but there's a possibility, and nobody could argue that our system wasn't working. The reason why you and your group are out there protesting is because you see the system not being allowed to work.
Yes, we see the backsliding into away from democracy, more towards authoritarians. Like we were just discussing. If you, here I am on the radio with you. I would argue, pushing back on this administration. Does that warrant me being arrested? I would argue no, and that is why our country is so great. We have this ability to push back, to voice our opinions.
I think yesterday, in my little dates in history that I did at the beginning, there was something about 1918, and in 1918, the Sedition Act of 1918, that's what it was called, and you could be arrested and I believe thrown behind bars for disagreeing with the government during wartime. Now, I'm not calling this a war. However, funny thing about wars, we have this war against cartels right now. Could that be considered seditionist if you and I are out there protesting?
I mean, it sounds to me like they're using the law to stifle dissent or people that don't agree with them. And again, these are not what these laws were designed for. We're seeing the courts ultimately, almost unanimously, tell them in multiple stages that what they're doing is not legally permissible.
But to your earlier point dealing with that, if you tie up the courts, federal courts, with this, you don't have time to have people go through the courts for the routine stuff like, well, let's check to make sure this person isn't a criminal that's trying to come into the country.
Right, correct. Again, it is these are fear tactics and tactics designed to overwhelm and, strain the systems, whereas they do work. These are systems that we've had for almost 300 years now. We will be, a country coming up this century. And so let us continue those processes. You know what I mean? If there is a will to amend the Constitution, then let's go that route. If these are things that we need to change, like birthright citizenship, but it needs to be done through legislation and through the systems we have, not through an executive order at the will of one elected official.
And I suppose if one elected official could make that type of an amendment, let's say, then the next president that comes in could turn around and change it. Then we'd be going back and forth because of executive orders.
Exactly, which is why, the Supreme Court ruling on immunity was so egregious, because no president should be allowed to act outside of the law. They ultimately are at the behest of the law as well. And, Richard Nixon tried to say, I'm the president, so anything I do is not illegal. And it's just not true.
I have this conversation with one of my former producers, and you mean to tell me if the president wants to go out and kill somebody that he can? And I said, yes, he can. And he goes, Brian, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, anytime that a president decides that they want to send the CIA in or whatever to knock off a leader or a subordinate of another country, and they do it, what do you call it? So, yes, the president does have the right to commit a homicide or authorize a homicide, because my guess is he or she would not pull the trigger
themselves. Sure.
Yeah.
And, you could argue that they would find a legal way to, argue that it was within their rights, But we know as American citizens that we are behested to those laws. Yeah. That is not a rule, a system of laws that works for us.
Absolutely not.
I am not able to do that, and no one else is either. And so, therefore, our elected officials should not be able to do these abuses of power.
Boy, I would love to have bring this argument from the administration to the Congress and to the legislature, because, quite frankly, I hear city councilors, New Bedford city councilors, and select board members in the towns. I'm in Dartmouth. I've lived in Fairhaven and Westport. I've heard them complaining, well, our hands are tied because of these unfunded mandates that they have to take care of, such as pensions, health care, et cetera, that they have to take care of for their employees. You and I can't mandate something like that, but our legislators can. And I don't know who authorized them to be allowed to do such. Get out and protest something like that. I'm serious. Get out and protest. We need so much protesting at this particular time, notwithstanding what the Trump administration is doing. But I have people, I can be talking about Trump and, well, what about when Maura Healey? And they're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Again, to what I said earlier, this whole idea that you live in a blue state or you live in a red district or whatever it may be, and therefore your vote doesn't count, is an idea designed to stifle your will, your desire to see those things changed. Any district can flip. Any elected official, no matter how long they've been an incumbent, can lose their seat. So,
have you seen that happen around here?
Unfortunately, not as much, but I would argue that continuing to have these discussions helps that change.
Well, I hope you're right. I know quite a few of the state reps and the one state senator in this area. State senator has been in office more than 20 years. State Rep Cabral, more than 20 years. State Rep Markey, my rep, more than 14 years.
There is some change, though. There's Chris Hendricks out of
6
Bedford,
years.
but young, and 6 years comparatively is, not to me as egregious as someone who's been in office since 1970.
You've got city councilors, one going into about his 30th year,
and we have an election coming up this year, and there's still time, I would say, to gather signatures and run for office if you're someone like Brian who does not like what the city council has been doing.
So how about Craig, who lives in the city, has an election coming up? If you were going to organize something dealing, something indivisible, what is it locally that you would be challenging?
I think locally we would, I think it's probably an easy topic and it's something you'll be discussing later, but I think Eversource is most certainly something that needs to be.
But how do you argue that on a city council level?
I think there's ways for city councils to sort of push back. There's opportunities out there for communities to sort of create their own energy sort of programs. And I think we need to sort of see more of an embrace of that and a separation of big companies like Eversource, who clearly have like almost a monopoly on energy in our region. I think that's...
As a libertarian, I wish that we had more sources, not to confuse that with Eversources, but more options.
I would agree with that.
More
completely.
Options. That stated, if you don't like option A, let's say Eversource, since that's what we're using right now, I do believe that there should be an option B for you to go to, but you're not allowed to do it. So in other words, you can't just say, I'm going to put solar panels on my roof and I'm not going to connect to Eversource. I think that's absolutely wrong, egregious, and I don't know who allowed that to go in, but between the regulatory board, the legislature, and I don't think anybody in the city council could do anything about that.
Yeah, when you see big major corporations like this, they have so much power with lobbying and their influence with PACs. And again,
they are a PAC.
I would argue that these are things, like rulings like Citizens United that need to be changed. But unfortunately, these aren't things that, we can, elect in a new president and be like, write an executive order that stops this, because as we talked about, the next president can come in and overturn that. We need to pursue legislatively our avenues to make these changes, overturn Citizens United, break up monopolies like Eversource. The power of the people is strong if they tune into it, if they tap into that and know that these corporations put forth thousands, if not millions of dollars to convince you that you cannot change things. And I think to your viewers or listeners and anyone else, and as we continue on throughout the year and whatever happens, that you are powerful. And joining movements like Indivisible and joining together makes your voices heard even more.
That stated, if somebody is interested in finding out more about Indivisible or maybe going to the next rally, whatever the case, quick email or quick website that people can go to?
Yeah, I know where you have listeners in California, I believe, as well. So
let's just keep it. We're going to keep it local.
Okay, we're going to keep it here. Yeah. So I would just do a Google search for Indivisible. It will bring up the national site, and then from there you will find us as well. So we are Southeast Mass, and then South Coast New England. Southeast Mass is based out of New Bedford. South Coast is sort of based out of Westport. We work with Rhode Islanders. There's some overlap in groups, but again, no matter who is listening, what your party affiliation is, if you are wanting to join a fight to make sure that these democratic norms and the Constitution is preserved, there is a place for you in Indivisible, and we welcome you.
Greg Swallow, thank you so much for coming in studio today. Really love this conversation, and I hope I can get you back. I won't be around for June 14th, but maybe the next go around, because my guess is there are going to be more and more rallies coming up.
I believe so. And Brian, feel free to reach out to me anytime. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to having more with you.
Thank you very much. Greg Swallow joining us in studio. Eversource stuff coming up on the other side of ABC, telling us what they want us to know. I have heard these stories about folks in New York City pushing folks off the platform in front of subways. And that is beyond the pale. That's beyond despicable. That is heinous to the 88th power. But the one thing that one thing that we know, those types of incidents are few and far between, thankfully. But yes, they do happen. And what I have noticed over the years is that the perpetrator ends up going to court, and if he or she is found guilty, they do the time. Sometimes there's something like a screw loose upstairs, and the time isn't as bad as maybe a first-degree murder would be. So that's why we have due process. And if it's somebody from the United States, we do not deport her or him. 71 degrees in Middleborough and 71 in Bristol, Rhode Island. So Eversource has a new plan, and it involves meters. And you're going to have to get a new meter, and you will pay for that new meter. In fact, you may already be paying for it. You don't like the idea, then you don't